The house I sit for is haunted. To protect my client, I'll be calling her Mrs. Spooky. I'm a 21-year-old female and started this job being a home health care worker back in September. The job at first was your pretty average job. All I basically had to do was make sure my client was well taken care of and make sure she had someone to talk to. Everything was very normal up until I started picking up more shifts at night. I'm a college student. One morning, I was getting my client medication ready when her grandson, who lives with her, is about to walk out to go to work. Because he kept knocking over this can of Febreze, he then put the can of Febreze in between the cushions so it didn't move. 10 minutes after he leaves, the can jumps out of the couch cushions, does a flip, and lands straight upwards. I freak out for a second, but then I play it off and tell myself there is some reasonable explanation. But it keeps continuing. Frames fall off walls, people talking in the kitchen and hallway when no one is home but me and my client, things being thrown at me, the figure of a face smeared against the kitchen window, shadow people. But last night was the worst of it. I got there early yesterday because my client had a food package waiting to be put in the fridge. My client greets me with a smile, and I make her some mac and cheese after I put the food up. My client dropped her fork and asked me to wash it, so I did. While clearing off the fork, I hear a can fall behind me, so I go to pick it up. The scrubbing brush from the sink goes flying at me. I'm spooked, but it's not the first time this has happened, so I go back to hanging out with Mrs. Spooky. Things are pretty back to normal until I hear more things start to fall in the kitchen. Maybe a cat snuck in. I go to turn on the kitchen light, but the light bulb bursts and the house goes from a good 94, my client gets cold easy, to a cool 60-ish degrees. At this point, I'm hoping there was just a weird power surge and had just turned everything off. I rush back to my client. Everything is fine, no power outages, and it's still pretty hot in the living room. Then a shadow moves in the kitchen and my client jumps back. Luckily, her grandson pulled up right after this, and he was pretty spooked when I told him what had happened. Mrs. Spooky is the only reason I haven't gone running for the hills, but there are some times when even she is not okay with the presence in the room and makes me stay close until she feels like it's safe. Maybe it's a ghost or demon. Maybe someone has been in the house without anyone knowing. All I know is I'm terrified to go back to work. The house I grew up in was most definitely haunted. My parents bought the land from a farmer, and we built and are the only ones to live in the house. It was a huge house on 5 acres of land and backed up to the woods. For years, we never had issues, until my dad finished the basement. He turned the basement into a big movie room on one side and a workout or game room on the other. Obviously, my brothers and I started spending a lot of time down there because it was like our own private movie theater. The lights down there would sometimes randomly flicker, but we all chalked that up to bad wiring because my dad did it himself. Occasionally, the TV would change channels while we were in the middle of a movie, and it would always change to some sort of kids channel, Cartoon Network, Disney, Nickelodeon. This led to a sort of sibling fight and blaming each other for sitting on the remote. After that happened a few times, we started setting the remotes on the table in the middle of the room, but the TV would still change channels. At this point, my siblings and I were convinced something was down there, but my parents kept ignoring it. Once, when I was about 10, I had just gotten home from school and was home alone. I was being a good child and started doing my chores, one of which was cleaning out my hamster's cage. I was walking out of the garage with the cage in one arm, hamster in her ball in the other arm, when I heard our front door open and slam shut, and stomping footsteps going up the stairs. This was weird because no one ever used our front door. Everyone went through the garage. I called out thinking it was one of my brothers, but got no answer. I set my hamster down and go to check the door. It was locked. I panicked, grabbed the house phone and called my mum while I sprinted to our neighbor's house. My mum rushed home from work and found no one was there, and we still can't explain what I heard. Another time, my best friend, neighbor and I decided to camp out in my front yard. We were about 11 and too scared to go into the woods alone. We had just gotten our tent all set up with our sleeping bags and lanterns, and had just laid down to read some magazines as the sun went down. Suddenly, we hear what sounded like a little girl singing. We both stop reading and stare at each other, trying to think of who it could be, because we were the only young girls that lived in that neighborhood. The sound started coming closer and sounded like it was right outside of our tent. We both got the chills and goosebumps. We both screamed and sprinted inside as fast as we could without looking back. I can still hear the sounds of that singing to this day. Nothing creepy happened for a few years after that, just the typical lights flicker and channels changing. Then, when I was 14, I had my volleyball team over for a sleepover. A few of them knew about the ghost haunting my house, so they brought a Ouija board for the night. Of course, I had to do it and find out who was haunting my family. First try, almost as soon as our fingers touched the planchette, it started moving. We asked typical questions like, "What's your name? Are you going to hurt us? Why are you here?" We only got no as our answer to those. I then asked, "Are you a little girl?" The planchette moved to yes. I said, "Did you live on this land before me?" "Yes." "How did you die?" F-I-R-E was spelled out on the board just after that. One of my friends freaked out and knocked the board over, saying that someone had touched her shoulder. My friends and I tried to look up if anything happened on the property before my family bought it. We did find out that there was a barn fire years before we bought the land, but the daughter of the family who owned it grew up and moved away. We couldn't find anything about a girl dying in the fire. My dad sold the house years later, but my brothers and I were talking about it recently, and I told them what happened with the Ouija board. One of my brothers freaked out and said it made so much sense. One night, he fell asleep in the basement and woke up in the middle of the night. There was a little girl standing in the doorway. He thought it was me, so he just said go away and went back to sleep, only to realize the next morning that I was at a friend's house for a sleepover. I don't know if the new owners have any similar experiences since living there. I'm just thankful, as far as ghosts encounters go, that our ghost was pretty harmless. The house I grew up in was built in 1922, unsure exactly of all of its past. When I was little, I would oftentimes have these dreams where I would wander through my house in the nighttime, trying to find something, or perhaps someone. The dream would always end when I find the tall, dark figure, nothing but a silhouette, standing in the middle of my kitchen, exposed by the overhead light over the kitchen sink that hadn't even worked for years before. It was always on in that dream though. I would wake up sometimes hearing these voices, Not angry or emotional at all, but usually just 2 to 3 voices talking mid-sentence of audible English words, but didn't make sense of much really. Sometimes I would even wake up frozen, like I couldn't breathe or move, but simply lay there with my eyes wide open for a few seconds, while hearing the voices speak briefly. My mother has always experienced things as well as my older sister. My mum hearing a jingle or eerie hymn coming from the back of the refrigerator, or maybe the pantry, late at night sometimes. Things would turn on or off. The year was 2001. I was just 8 years old. One night, my mother woke up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. She was frozen in her steps in the hall when greeted by a deep, hollow, and loud voice right in front of her. That of a man saying slowly and forced out, "Don't worry, everything will be all right." She turned on the lights, looked around, and saw nothing. It was a snowy night when she took a look outside. No fresh footprints were seen around the home. She woke my dad up to investigate the voice, but my dad didn't believe in ghosts or anything of the sort. He came into my bedroom and grabbed my wooden baseball bat, and it woke me up. I worried for my dad and what was happening, and wanted to go downstairs. I hadn't heard the voice in the hall. I just stayed awake and listened, but eventually fell back asleep. I only heard the story of this later when I was older, and I had finally known why my dad came in for my bat. My dad found nothing out of the ordinary. My mum's father had passed away the previous year of a heart attack, and my dad's mother was suffering and dying of cancer at the time. My mum seems to think that the message was in reference to those events. Throughout the years, my mum and sister would experience most of which was lights being turned on and off, and sometimes an eerie jingle from the kitchen at night. Fast forward to 2018. My parents are divorced, and the house has been vacant for 2 years now, just to be heated during winter months. My wife and I decided to move in to rent it from my dad, since we were tired of the apartment living. The first night I moved in, and I was unpacking, I immediately felt a strong presence, and didn't feel like being there, almost like unwelcoming and being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling, as my wife was working night shifts at the coffee shop and I was alone. The next day is when it started to all happen again. I got up for my morning shift at 4:30 and was brushing my teeth just in the other room. My wife woke up to a voice that said, "Earl." She asked me if I had said it, and I in fact didn't. I was brushing my teeth at the time. I thought to myself, here we go again, but I didn't tell her that. The next morning, my wife was wide awake watching Netflix on her phone. 4:15 comes around. I snooze the phone. Not long after, we hear this bizarre jingle or hymn at the foot of our bed for like 8 to 10 seconds. It was long enough for her to shake me and say my name, and I still heard it. It kind of reminded me of the "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" from one of those little teddy bears or something. So terrified, we both threw the lights on and searched the room. There was nothing but boxes of clothes in our room, and nothing that could have possibly made that sound. We got the house blessed the next day, and we hadn't experienced anything too far out after that. Occasionally, a light would work itself, or the stove range fan would turn on by itself. It didn't work when we tried it. There was also another time where me and my wife were both standing right next to each other, and I was getting a phone call from her cell, but she was using her phone, and it didn't even show on her phone that she was calling me. I was too afraid to pick up, but sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I did pick up. Later on, we got a home, and my sister moved in, and had one night experienced a disembodied voice at the end of her bed, just whistling the tune to the TV show she had just finished watching. She had also taken videos and seen several orbs just floating around. I just asked her the other day if she had experienced anything lately, and she says that she doesn't anymore. She and her boyfriend are in a good and happy place in life at the moment, and she seems to think that could be why she isn't experiencing weird things anymore. She also told me that she thought the house was some sort of portal where many spirits would come through. I'm not sure what to think or believe, but after me and my wife both hearing that hymn, it definitely must be something. Let me start by saying this. I've been able to sense spirits or entities, or the energy of people living since I was 6. I even had my great-grandfather present himself to me in semi-physical form. I had no way of knowing what he looked like or who he was because he died tragically at work, and no one in my family likes to talk about it. I learned after this incident as to why, as my grandmother told me on the one rare occasion. 3 days later, my grandmother found his wedding band that had been misplaced for 15 years. So I recently moved in with my fiancé and his family. I've been living here for 3 months now, and just in the past 2 weeks, there have been weird things happening. It's an older farmhouse, and I'm not sure if someone has died here or not. The house itself doesn't have much of a creepy feel to it. It's just a less modern home, so it's kind of a sight for sore eyes, which I don't mind. I like older, thrifted, antique things. They have history. It first started with me walking in the middle of the night to get some water. Everyone was sleeping, so the lights were off. I made my way down a flight of steps and to the kitchen with my flashlight on my phone. Nothing out of the ordinary. As I'm going back up, I get about halfway on the stairs and feel like something was watching me from behind. I was so terrified, I didn't want to walk all the way to the top of the steps because I feared I would see someone appear behind me in the mirror, which is located at the top. I tell myself, quit being a little chicken, squeezed my eyes shut, and ran up the rest of the way. I accidentally slammed the door so hard I woke up my fiancé. He obviously asked me what the hell was wrong with me, as I scared him and looked terrified myself. I told him what happened, and in the manliest way possible, he told me to go back to bed, and it was nothing. But I could tell he seemed weirded out by my story too. Since then, I've heard noises in the middle of the night, like someone is in the basement or the kitchen, and no one else living here gets up in the middle of the night unless they go to the bathroom, which is a completely different noise than someone rummaging around in the basement or the kitchen. Progressed to earlier this week, it's only me, my sister-in-law, and her daughter home. We all agree to go out on a Walmart excursion. I lock my dog in his kennel on the top floor. They tie their dog up outside. It was a warmer day, and both dogs can't be out together. They cause mischief. When we return, the basement is destroyed. There was stuff literally everywhere. We tried to dismiss it by saying maybe an animal got in because the landlord came and left the door open. The next morning, we were at the table talking about it again, but this time it clicked in my brain that when we came home, the door to the basement was in fact closed, and no one else had been home yet. We were only gone for 2 hours. A few days go by with no activity. Then, yesterday, my sister-in-law's daughter tells me she heard scratching on the wall closest to her bed, which happens to be the one wall that's closest to the bottom of the stairs. I went to the gym today after putting in a load of laundry and put the second load I was going to do when I got home on top of the washing machine. I've done this multiple times before and nothing has happened to my basket. When I got home and went to change them over, The dryer, the basket, and dirty clothes were on the floor. I'm honestly starting to think some paranormal stuff is going on here. When I was around 11 or 12 years old living in the UK, I went through a period of 4 months where I could never sleep all the way through at home. No matter how tired I was or what time I went to bed, I would always wake up around 2 to 3 a.m. If I slept at my grandmother's house, no problems at all. Every night that I woke up, it would be silent in the house except for a light tapping sound coming from the corner of my bedroom where my wardrobe used to be. Every night, I would hear this tapping noise and it would keep me from being able to fall back asleep, in part because I was absolutely pooping my pants. The tapping sound was never continuous. It would tap for different lengths of time, then stop, before continuing again. This counted out my mother's "it must be next door neighbor's clock" explanation when I told her about it. Creaking wardrobe doors and just my imagination were 2 other explanations that my mother gave me. Also, I used that wardrobe daily when getting changed into fresh clothes, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I remember one night, I decided enough was enough. I had spent about an hour lying in bed, listening to the tapping and struggling to sleep. I jumped out of bed, went over to my wardrobe, grasped both handles, and flung the doors open. There was a pause for about 1 minute while I had the handles in my hands, once again pooping myself. As the doors flung open, a t-shirt that I had had on one of my hangers hit me in the face, and I had the feeling like something had punched me in the stomach. I remember lying on the floor in my room, not sure how long for, but it was like time just jumped forward 3 hours and my parents were getting up for work. I said nothing and went about my day as if nothing had happened. That was the last night that I ever woke up in the early hours of the morning, and the last time I ever heard that tapping sound. As I've grown older, I've spoken to my mother about it all, and she has told me many stories about our old house, and I have returned the favor with my other experiences. She said that because I was young and got scared easy, she always tried to find rational excuses for whatever spooky scenario I ever told her I was in. I'm in my early 30s now, and much of this happened between the ages of 10 and 14. All of it started shortly after my family and I moved into a new home and town. The house we moved into was a fairly new construction at the time, and I don't believe there was anything interesting about the land it was built on. Within a couple of months of moving in, I had my first experience with sleep paralysis. I had gone to bed late that night. Roughly 5 minutes after shutting the lights off and closing my eyes, I felt a cold presence touching my chest. I opened my eyes and saw nothing. Naturally, I was creeped out and ran into my parents' room for comfort. My mum convinced me it was a bad dream and that I should just go back to bed, which I did. Immediately after closing my eyes again, I felt the same thing, except this time moving through the center of my chest with force. That feeling then expanded throughout my torso. Upon opening my eyes, I realized I could not move or speak. At this point, I could feel something watching me directly to the right of the bed. I laid there for maybe 5 or 10 minutes trying to scream before regaining the ability to move. As soon as I could, I jumped up and ran back into my parents' room. Needless to say, I slept next to them that night. Lucky for me, I've only had to experience sleep paralysis a couple of times in my life. There were several other odd encounters to follow though. A couple months after that, at night, is when I had my next experience. My grandmother was watching my brother and me that evening. She was on the first floor with my brother. I was on the second floor, and from my window looking down onto my backyard, the house borders a small forest and river, I saw a bright white figure walking from one end to the other. It looked like a fully grown man, but glowing, and I never really saw a face. I was a bit freaked out at the sight of this, so I ducked to ensure whatever it was did not see me. I briefly peeked out of the window a couple of seconds after, and it was gone. I ran downstairs immediately to find both my grandmother and my brother in the same room. No one that I know of was in the backyard at the time. These experiences piqued my interest in the paranormal. Roughly a few months after that, I convinced my mum to go buy me a Ouija board. I then convinced my babysitter, who was a few years older than me, to use it with my brother while my parents were out of the house. We turned off all the lights and lit a couple of candles and tried to talk to the dead. At the time, I was skeptical, and I assumed our babysitter was the one manipulating the planchette, but it was moving and responding to all our questions. We eventually decided we were done with it and put the board away. Again, I kind of laughed this one off. Thinking back on it, the frequency of these occurrences went way up after this experience. The fact is that I never really felt alone in this house, especially when I was the only one home. Fast forward to middle school, I was usually the first one home and would return home alone for a couple of hours every day. I generally spent most of my time in the basement, where the TV, video game console, and computer were. During this time, I would regularly hear the kitchen cabinets slamming shut. They weren't open to begin with. The dining room chairs being dragged across the floor, and I always felt as though there was something watching. I did at times wonder if some of this was in my head, only for the thoughts to be validated by my brother and a few friends that would come over at various intervals. There was another standalone event around the same time, where my brother and I were playing games in his room. We were both sitting on his bed, and to my right was the door to the hallway, which was wide open. The lights were off in the bedroom, and there was some tertiary lighting coming from the hallway. Out of my peripheral view was again a fully formed person, some kind of white figure that appeared to walk past the doorway out in the hall. As I turned my head right, my brother, to my left, sneezed and blood came pouring out of his nose. Again, I saw just enough to be creeped out, but not enough to fully validate exactly what I saw. There were a few other events to follow, more or less the same as the stuff I just described. All of this came to a head one night, and this is also where I saw some of the most vivid stuff to date. I was 13, and my best friend was sleeping over. It was Friday night, and we were the only ones in the house at that point. We were on the second floor playing video games, when all of a sudden, we heard the cabinet doors slamming and chairs moving. I was used to it by now, but my friend got a bit freaked out and asked what it was. I'm paraphrasing, but I said something to the effect of, "It's those bloody ghosts again. Screw those ghosts." This is when things got weird for us. Shortly after that, my TV turned off. The room became very cold, and it was almost like the air became heavy, and it took much more energy to get up and move around. We booked it from my room and went downstairs to the first floor. We calmed down afterwards and figured we had overreacted to what was probably an odd coincidence. We then decided to go back upstairs to play video games. As we were walking up, it became very cold and we began feeling weighed down again. We ignored this again as if it was all in our heads. We got to my room and turned the TV on along with the video games. After about a minute or two, the same thing happened where the TV turned off, only this time I saw what looked like a floating orb or two out of the corner of my eye. We again ran downstairs. Like an idiot, I tried going upstairs a third time. Same cold and heaviness as before. This time I approached the top of the stairs. I looked into my parents' room from the hallway. The door was open but the lights were off, and to the right of their bed, I saw an all-white figure standing with no torso or head. I again booked it downstairs. At this point, we went into full-on paranoia mode. I tried calling my parents, no answer. We were stuck at home, feeling terrorized and not sure when the adults were coming back. At some point, we actually started chanting and praying out of desperation, which I think made things worse, because the air on the first floor became heavy and we felt the cold rush again. I also started to see the same small orbs fly into the room from upstairs, only this time directly in my field of view. This brought my anxiety to the next level, and I finally yelled out and apologized for saying what I said earlier, and in a very candid way, I pleaded with the spirits to leave me alone, pointing out that we both live here, and that I would not mess with them going forward if they did not mess with me. As I was apologizing, I saw 2 or 3 more of those small orbs, and one much larger, dark one, purple or black, all come into the room and just hang there for more than a few seconds. What's odd is after my apology, the orbs dissipated and the air cleared up. Coincidentally, my mum came home maybe 20 minutes after that whole thing ended, and all went back to normal, as if nothing happened. I have not seen anything since. The noises we regularly heard on the first floor continued. Although they didn't bother me much at that point, I do think my friend may have been a bit traumatized from the experience though. He claimed he felt he was being watched for a good while after that night. I'd be interested to hear some of your thoughts. Some of this stuff was downright terrifying in the moment. I'd love to understand what I was dealing with. For context, my boyfriend lives alone in a 2-bedroom apartment. He lives in a gated community with around 12 blocks and 10 houses in each block, so it's a pretty big place. I've been going to his place for almost a year now. The apartment is also located near a graveyard, if that means anything. Anyway, I stay over during the weekends, and I'm there practically every other day too. The first time I visited, I couldn't help but feel some sort of presence. Not necessarily evil, but I did feel something. I'm known for being intuitive, and I pick up on energy well. However, nothing outright weird happened, so I brushed it off. Now, let me get to the slightly alarming bits that got me wondering. The master bedroom of the house has a very off-putting vibe to it. It is always dark, no matter whether the lights are on or the curtains are open. The TV turns off by itself sometimes. Lights turn on by themselves. This happened 2 times, and it's very clear none of us did it. Once we were drinking at home, and out of nowhere, a light that we never usually turn on because the switch is located in an inconvenient place was suddenly on. We dismissed it as maybe one of us turning it on when we were drunk and quickly brushed it away. The second time was in the master bedroom. There is a bathroom there that he occasionally uses. One day, before we headed out, I remember the bathroom light being on and thinking to myself, why does he keep leaving this light on? The electricity bill is going to skyrocket. I clearly remember switching it off after that. Of course, when we came back home, The light was turned on. Once, my boyfriend and I were asleep in the other bedroom, and suddenly, he started coming closer to my side of the bed while still asleep. He kept nudging, and when I asked him what happened, he replied saying, "Someone is sleeping there." I didn't wake him up after that, for my own peace of mind. Needless to say, I was bricking it for the rest of the night. My boyfriend's mum came to visit and swears to God that she felt something pull her leg while she was asleep. Probably the most creepy incident I have encountered. I gifted my boyfriend a leather bracelet for his birthday, and he loves it. A week or so ago, he couldn't find it. I went over for the weekend, and we scoured the entire house looking for it. I mean, we swept up the entire place. He usually leaves it on a table below his TV, and I remember literally sweeping up the whole table looking for it. It's not even a messy table. It just had his helmet and a few other daily things like keys. We gave up hope and stepped out. We came home that night and went straight to bed. The next morning, the bracelet was right there on the table, as though someone had neatly placed it there. I showed it to my boyfriend. We took one look at each other and we knew. Again, we just chose not to address it. This whatever entity that I suspect is there is not seemingly harmful, although it is creepy. My boyfriend has lived there for over a year, and nothing too alarming has happened except for these things. He lives alone too. However, it is bothering me a bit. Moving out is definitely a doable option, but is that the only solution? Do we just leave it alone and coexist? My experience with ghosts happened about 10 years ago when I was in my early 40s. I was at my parents' house with my family visiting for holiday. When we visit my parents, we stay in one of the upstairs rooms. At the time, I didn't believe in ghosts and never really put much thought into it. We are going to sleep in the room we always stay in, and I was having a hard time sleeping, so I went to another room so I wouldn't wake my wife with all the tossing and turning. As I was laying there trying to sleep, I hear distinct footsteps on the carpet floor. It then got very cold, and I'm starting to panic a bit. I just lay there, frozen, as I could feel someone standing right next to me. Then I know it's a he because I got to know him a bit. He starts pulling on the sheets. So I dart across the hall back into the bed where my wife is sleeping and lay there freaking out. Then I'm visited by another ghost. This time, it was a young girl who basically wanted to play. She would not walk like the guy. She floated in, and I knew she was in the room when it got cold. And when she would show up, she would drop invisible pellets on my face. It didn't feel like raindrops, more like little bubbles. So then, I was all of a sudden dealing with two freaking ghosts. And basically, these ghosts were just a pain in the ass. They were constantly messing with me. The guy was the worst. He was constantly screwing with me. He would come into the room the same way, slowly walk on the carpet, and it would always get cold. His favorite thing to do was come up and get right beside me and blow real hard into my ear. And pulling on the sheets. He was a jerk and just wanted to mess with me. The young girl and the guy were always together, but visited me separately. I don't think the guy was her dad, but he acted like it. We stayed at my parents' for 3 nights on this trip, and I'm trying to fight through these ghosts messing with me. I was very happy to get the hell out of there and leave the ghosts behind. We were about an hour or so on our drive back when we realized the freaking ghosts were in the car with us. So for the next 2 weeks, I had the ghosts with me at my house. These ghosts really just want to mess with you and try to make you look as crazy as possible. I had not told my wife about the ghosts until we were driving back home. My wife could not feel or hear the ghosts, although I would tell her every time they would come around. It was always the same thing. When they would show up, I was immediately hit with cold air. We would be sitting on the couch, and I would tell her that the ghosts were right beside me, blowing in my ear, or scratching on the surface where my head was. Just stuff to make you crazy. They would not touch or hurt me. They did not talk. There was never any reference to religion. The guy was a smoker, as when he would breathe on me, you could smell it. The little girl just liked to play and sing. She was proud of how she could sing, and you could tell the guy was proud of her too. To make a long story shorter, I'll just say how you get rid of ghosts. At first, I took a biblical path to try and get rid of them, lots of prayer. But like I said, religion played no part of this. So ultimately, I got rid of them because I ignored them. I had to act like I didn't know they were there and just ignore them. After a few days of ignoring them and acting like they were not there, they left. I would say they were with me for about 10 days. As mentioned, this all happened about 10 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm still shaking my head in disbelief that this happened to me. Back at my mum's house, my room was in the basement, and the only way to get into the furnace room was through my room. The way my bed was set up was when I was on my side, I could see directly into the furnace room because there was no door separating my room and the furnace room. So one night, I was laying in bed. I saw a cat walk out of the furnace room and kind of look around my room, and after I blinked, it was gone. After I talked to one of my friends, whose family was friends with the people we bought the house from, she told me that their cat actually died in the house. I'm not sure if it died in my room or not though. Another time, I was suffering from an ear infection, but my mum would never believe me when I told her I was having problems. She always thought I was doing it for attention or being dramatic. So again, I was lying in bed, not being able to do anything because of the pain. I saw a man standing in my doorway. He was around average height, but he was built and had wide shoulders, and I was watching him for around 10 seconds when I heard a deep man's voice ask me if I was okay. I didn't feel scared. It almost lessened the pain, and I fell asleep. Around a day or two later, my mum told me that she woke up to a man standing at the foot of her bed, and she felt him tapping her foot. She told the man to go away, and after, she said that she felt like she was being pushed into the bed. When she was describing the man, it matched exactly what I saw. The way my house was, you walked down the stairs, and then there was another staircase with like 4 stairs that you went down. And that's where the furnace room, my room, and the laundry room was. So one night, when I was in bed, I was looking at the laundry room, which was open, and I saw a woman walk in wearing a white dress. I remember her being pretty and not creepy at all. So I walked into the laundry room, and it was empty. So I went upstairs in the living room because my stepdad was still awake watching TV. So I told him what happened, and he said he saw the same woman walk downstairs. One time when I was home alone, I was sitting on the couch watching TV, and it was a couple of days after my brother's birthday, so he had one of those helium balloons in his room upstairs. I was watching TV when I see the balloon floating down the stairs, and it stops right in front of me, like something was trying to play with me. At first, I thought it could have been an open window, but I realized that the windows were closed and it had to have left his room, float down the stairs, and turn towards me and stop, which kind of freaked me out. So I told my parents, but they just laughed at me for getting freaked out by a balloon. But a couple of days later, the same thing happened to them. But the weird part was, they were sitting in different seats that I was, so I don't think it was a draft or anything. The last story freaked me out the most. So one night, I was in my bed. My stepdad built a wall to cover the furnace room door in my room, and then made a doorway outside my room in the hallway so it's easier to get in. As I'm lying there, I can see a shape of a person peeking into my room and then quickly ducking back into the furnace room. I watched whatever it was do that for around 10 minutes, but the weird part, it was really dark in my room, but whatever it was darker than the darkness, if that makes sense. I only saw that thing one time. I'll preface this with the fact that I've had many paranormal encounters since being young, and many were also witnessed by the people I was living with, or confirmed by neighbors. We had fallen on some tough times financially, and the only real affordable housing where my son could remain at his current school he loved was some really old apartments. The complex was built in the 1950s and was run down. It was a 2/2 split floor plan. My husband and I took the master bedroom with the bathroom inside. A separate room though. The bedroom was always freezing. I could never stay warm in there, even though it's Texas, and being from Wisconsin, I know what real cold is. The other rooms in the apartment were normal temperature. I never felt comfortable being alone in the apartment, mostly because I never felt alone. The living room wall with the TV on it was also our bedroom wall and door. We always kept the bedroom door shut. I was in the living room watching TV alone. From the spot I always sat in, I swear I could see and hear the bedroom doorknob rattle, like a gust of wind had been blown at it. Our AC unit was at the other end of the apartment, and there was no vents or windows anywhere near the bedroom door. There was a coat closet door adjacent to the bedroom door in the entryway, and it never did the same thing, just the bedroom doorknob rattled. We lived on the second floor of a 2-story complex, so no one was above us. The people below us were incredibly quiet people. I never once heard them at all, let alone slamming doors or windows that could have affected us. I was again sitting on the couch facing the bedroom door, reading this time, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a human-sized black shadow. It crossed from the entryway, past the coat closet door, and went right through the bedroom door, rattling the doorknob. I took my glasses off and tried to refocus, thinking there may be a smear or something on my glasses. There was nothing. I got up and went into the bedroom, and nothing was there. About a week later, the same thing happened, but this time the shadow was only 2 or 3 feet high. The same path from the entryway, coat closet, and right through the bedroom door with the handle rattling again. I got up, went into the bedroom, and again nothing was there. A few days later, I caught it again out of the corner of my eye, but it was just standing there, full size, in the entryway, like it had been watching me. I only caught a glimpse this time before it disappeared, and this time I saw purple in its face, like purple eyes, although it could have been a scarf or maybe a hat. I wasn't usually ever alone in the evenings, but my husband and son were both gone one night. I was watching TV in the living room and felt really anxious, like I was not alone. The bedroom door handle started rattling along with the door shaking some this time. I started getting pretty freaked out. I knew I needed to go check things out. I got up enough courage knowing that I had to go into the bedroom, and that the light switches that are in that room are not next to the door, and I needed to use our bathroom, which meant going into the dark rooms to get the lights turned on. I took some deep breaths and opened the bedroom door, and as I went straight to the bathroom door in the dark, it opened up. I reached around to the left to flip on the light switch. What I felt instead, in the dark, was my hand go through some wet substance I can only compare to jello-ish or hair gel. I was shocked, flipped on the light, and went to grab the towel off the rack, completely expecting my whole hand to be soaked in something. It was dry as a bone. There was nothing different about the bedroom or bathroom, yet again, and the sensation of the gel stuff on my hand was gone. My middle daughter was over a few weeks later, sitting at my vanity in our bedroom, which was next to the bedroom door. I had told her of my experiences and others. She's sensitive too to energies. I was getting dressed and she was putting on makeup as we were going out. She said, "Mum, the shadow just walked through the door, past me, and into the bathroom. It looked like an old woman." She was the only one who had ever seen it besides me. We actually ended up swapping bedrooms, so my son could have the larger master bedroom to have friends over and play games. After we switched bedrooms, I never saw the shadow again, and the other bedroom was always reasonably warm. To this day, I'm not sure what I put my hand into that night. I have no idea, but without proof and being alone that night, they are only ideas. We moved a few months later, and I've never seen the black shadow again. My boyfriend and I have had a few strange occurrences happen since we moved into our current flat last July. Before I describe these events, I will say that I began experiencing sleep paralysis around 4 years ago and have had a range of unpleasant experiences with it in the past. However, these experiences have never been physical, only visual, until moving into this new flat. I will also say that my boyfriend has never had any past experiences regarding anything that he would consider paranormal, though the events that have occurred in the flat have left us both a bit confused and spooked. Since my boyfriend and I moved into our flat, we have experienced minor things such as noises sounding like something has fallen onto the floor and begun to roll across it, only to find nothing that could have made the noise. Other times, we have heard noises as if something large is being dragged across the wall in the hallway, but when we have opened the door to check what's making all the noise, there is nothing there, and the motion sensor light is off. If it's activated, it stays lit for around 5 minutes. One very common thing we experience is the chain on the bedroom blinds rocks from side to side sometimes. This doesn't happen as a gentle swaying though. There have been a number of occasions where we have gone into the bedroom to investigate a loud clattering noise. We have heard it over the volume of our TV or music, to find it swinging from left to right rather than forwards or backwards. We have tried to explain this away as just a draft, but this would continue to happen even when there was no possible airflow from the windows, or vents, or fans, or the radiator. Even if this were to be caused by any of these things, the chain would swing forwards and backwards, not left to right, and it definitely wouldn't make such a noise to begin with. It sounds as if it's been lifted up and released, causing it to hit the wall and then begin to sway. Upon initially moving in, I was having terrible trouble sleeping or staying asleep, to the point where I had to seek medical advice. I was sleeping during the day, as I work part-time night shift while I'm at university and finish work at 7:30 a.m, but have since started going to bed earlier in the evening. When I was actually managing to sleep, I would have very graphic, intense nightmares. Some were so bad I would wake up and just burst into tears. On a few occasions, I would have sleep paralysis too, but there was one time this happened that ended up really shaking me up. Across from my bed is a wardrobe where both doors are fully mirrored. The right side wall, as you see it from the bed, also has a mirror above a small desk. During this particular sleep paralysis, I watched my boyfriend, who was not home but at work, walk past the wardrobe mirrors from left to right, but this appeared only as his reflection inside the mirror. He then wasn't visible for a moment, as he seemed to have walked out of the frame of the mirror until I saw the reflection past the other mirror on the right. After this, there was nothing for a few seconds, but I was still in paralysis until I felt something yank the bottom of my duvet covers away from me. Cliché, I know, but this had never happened to me before. It spooked me out of my sleep paralysis, and I shot up and grabbed my covers towards me. I still don't know how to explain this away, as my sleep paralysis experiences have never been physical like this, so I don't really know what to make of it. Another similar instance happened one night. My boyfriend was driving home from work and got stuck in a bad traffic jam on the motorway, delaying him a good few hours due to the distance from the site he had been working at. Because I was working early, I went to bed before he arrived home. At some point in the evening, I remember him getting home and me having a sleepy conversation with him right before he got in bed, and I fell back asleep. I'm not sure how long after this I was woken up again, but I was woken up by my boyfriend, who was standing at the side of the bed and had brought us some food. I was instantly confused, asking where he had gotten the food from and when he had left to get it, to be met with the same confusion. Apparently, he had only just gotten home. I'm still confused by this, as this is not something that has ever happened to me and really creeped us both out, and I don't know what to make of it. The final straw for me was one evening I was talking to my boyfriend as I was just walking around tidying up, only to turn to him at one point and see what can only be described as a solid silhouette of a child crouched down directly behind him. At this point, I started straight up freaking out, running into the bedroom and refusing to leave for the rest of the night. The next day, I contacted my stepmom, who is very spiritual and has had all sorts of encounters and experiences with the unseen world, including running her own business where she does tarot, amongst other things. My dad and my stepmom came to visit the following weekend, where she cleansed the flat and recommended I buy black tourmaline for protection, which I have. Since then, this kind of activity has decreased, but not stopped entirely, resigning itself to just the random, unexplained noises. One thing that I noted when my stepmom came to cleanse the flat was that when she asked whose side of the bed, it was that which my boyfriend slept on, but didn't elaborate, and honestly, I didn't ask why at the time, but I'm going to, as the events keep playing on my mind, and I feel like I have no answers to anything. I really don't know what to make of any of this. The only connections I can make are all leading back to my boyfriend, with a silhouette crouched behind him, the physical sleep paralysis, him getting home twice in the same night, and my stepmom asking about his side of the bed. This is the second place we have lived together, and the occurrences only started upon moving here. I did scour the depths of the internet and found that supposedly we live right by a ley line, but I've found no solid evidence to support this, though it is apparently discussed in a book about the city that was published in 1987 which talks about legends, folklore, and mysteries. This particular book, however, seems pretty hard to come across, with it either being unavailable or unaffordable.